Today on Secrets of Beautiful Gardens.
Welcome to one of the most famous palaces and gardens in the world.
You are cordially invited on a royal tour.
You can just see the romance, the history and the beauty.
We travel across Europe to discover the regal gardens of the world's most lavish royal residences.
You can't help but be amazed on the sheer scale of the garden.
How grand is that? It takes your breath away.
There's more opulence and extravagance than you could possibly imagine.
This here was the King's Water feature, and it goes 13 metres high, the biggest in the whole of Europe at its time.
As we take you on a journey fit for a king or queen.
Pretty impressive, eh?
Hello and a right royal welcome to today's show. On this very special episode of Secrets of Beautiful Gardens, Jason and I are exploring some of the magnificent grounds of the world's most famous palaces and castles.
Now, over the centuries, the European royal families were a competitive lot. They'd go and steal your land, steal your titles, take over your castles, and they'd also pinch your garden ideas. And then they'd replicate it, but bigger and better.
And with egos even bigger than their land holdings, their estates indulged every whim and fancy.
So join us while we visit some of the world's most palatial royal residences and share the secrets to their amazing grounds.
The first stop on our royal tour today takes us to France, to a place where majesty meets nature in spectacular fashion.
Opulent? Yes, over the top for sure. Welcome to one of the most famous palaces and gardens in the world.
Yes, this is Versailles on the outskirts of Paris, built by the king of self-promotion, Louis XIV, also known as the Sun King. The palace gardens need to be seen to be believed. Back in 1662, this whole area was a mosquito-infested swamp, but Louis XIV dreamt big. The glory of the garden meant the glory of the monarchy. So France's best landscape gardeners got to work. 800 hectares to drain and clear. It took 40 years to finish the job.
Well, it's a very exciting time here in the garden because they're just planting out the parterres. And they're just fabulous. You know, I love these patterns and designs. What are we planting? Cosmos. This white cosmos looks great at night because it reflects the moonlight. Some beautiful bedding begonias and then lots of dianthus. This is the original pink.
Of course, in a king's garden, it's not just about plants.
If you haven't already guessed it, Louis XIV was totally obsessed with water and fountains. In fact, there are a total of 50 here in the gardens.
The bigger and more over the top, the better. Even the stillness of the water parterres was designed to reflect the might of the king. Now, in case you haven't already noticed,
Everything in Versailles is supersized to ensure that the kings of France were able to showcase their citrus to the very best. They created the biggest orangery in the world. This is some potted garden. You know, there are 1,500 plants here. They were being brought to France and to Paris as they were being discovered in Spain, in North Africa, and of course in China. There's an amazing pomegranate just over there that is over 200 years old.
yes, this is a formal garden on a grand scale, including 700 topiaries.
They're predominantly taxus or yew trees. Have you ever wondered how they get this sort of bare stem? These are pruned off right at the very beginning as the tree is growing. It just takes time and patience, but you know, you can end up with something like this 300 years later.
The breathtaking rows of clipped lime trees go on for kilometres.
And then there are these huge hedges, hornbeam going up 6 metres tall. But you won't believe this. Have a look round the side. They're only a metre wide. Now that's some gardening.
And just when you think the kings of France couldn't pack any more onto the estate, you come across their little weekenders. Yes, this is the Grand Trianon, or Pink Palace, used for the odd private rendezvous or two.
But it's the little palace next door that has us most fascinated.
This is the famous Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette's private escape from the stuffy life of court.
It's very much Versailles in miniature, French and formal, but more personal and intimate. This space is surrounded by these magnificent pleached lime trees. And interestingly, the canopies are high enough to be able to plant a beautiful row of perfumed French roses.
There's cleome, dahlias, carnations, and the little salvias. It's very feminine, and definitely it's got her stamp of approval on it. And when even all this got too dull and unexciting for the Queen, she had escaped behind her little palace to this place.
Perhaps the most charming and bizarre of all the hideaways would have to be Marie Antoinette's very own fairy tale village that she created here basically for the Queen and her court to act out a sort of peasant lifestyle fantasy.
Yes, not a chandelier or gold statue in sight. Here, the infamous Queen would dress up as a milkmaid, lead lambs on ribbons, and play at the simple life.
Even though the village or hamlet was a complete make-believe of the Queen's, there were some parts of it that were real, and of course, everyone needs to eat, so the veggie garden was it. The globe artichokes are absolutely fantastic. They grew their own grapes for producing wine. Beautiful perfumed roses, they even grew tall bearded iris on the top of the roofs.
Marie Antoinette's fairy tale village is an absolute must-see when you're visiting Versailles Palace and Gardens. And it's all just 20 kilometres from the centre of Paris.
It's no wonder that the gardens in the Palace of Versailles attract 10 million visitors every year. But surprisingly, it has been open to the public since the time of Louis XIV. But there was very strict dress code. You know, no frock coat, no entry was the rule. Not sure if I'd get in there today, but anyway. Later, we uncover the hidden gardens of Buckingham Palace. If you think the rhododendrons are spectacular, wait till you see the Mollis azaleas. And how to bring a little bit of France to your patch.
You can't go past the croissant. I like mine with Vegemite butt.
And coming up next,
This was the grand summer retreat for the Dutch royal family.
Het Low and its grounds need to be seen to be believed.
And when it's this beautiful, you can see why they want to go on holidays. This next magnificent Baroque garden is over 330 years old. But back in 1795, it was plundered and left in ruin. But in the 1970s, it was resurrected and once again, fit for a king. How grand is that? It takes your breath away. It's called Het Low Palace, or the Wooded Palace. This was the grand summer retreat for the Dutch royal family. It's over 300 years old, and when it's this beautiful, you can see why they want to go on holidays. This place was built in 1685 by William III of Orange and his wife Mary, just a few years before they became King and Queen of England. And today their legacy lives on thanks to the tireless work of people like head gardener Willem.
This garden is as you see it now, it's a new garden. It's a recreation of a Baroque garden.
Yes, it had to be totally recreated because after William and Mary, the grounds fell into ruin from war and looting. And then the French moved in.
Brother of Napoleon, he became king of the Netherlands for a short time. So the palace was plastered white and the entire garden was covered with up to 2 meters of sand. So it started at the top of the stairs. They were completely covered with sand.
And that's pretty much how it remained, buried until 1975, when the Dutch began to dig out the lost gardens of Hetlo. Quite an incredible feat, but now the 17th century garden is back to its former glory, all laid out in its original decorative scroll pattern. So when you look at a garden like this, how can we relate it to our own backyards? They've used cheap, inexpensive pebble. I'd call that blue metal every day. You can buy it for about 60 bucks a tonne. This one here, a washed river pebble. And as for these little hedges, we'd use buxus or mainly a lily-pilly like tiny trove. All in all, it's pretty much things that we use already. Sure, maintenance is a massive job. So here at the Palace, they've come up with their own special trimming machine, which runs along the steel edging and makes things a whole lot quicker. And speaking of ingenious, how cool is this? Now, the next time I hear someone say, oh, I've got a sloping block and I can't do anything with it, we'll just take this for inspiration. It's on a even greater than 45-degree angle. And that's why they've got a specific tractor that comes along here with a hydraulic arm, and it mows it nice and safely while the driver's still in the tractor. When William and Mary became King and Queen of England, they had to have a garden that matched their stature in the world. So they built this one here, the upper garden. And if you look at it, it's still parterre, which is French-inspired, but there's less hedges. It's all lawn. You might think that's a little bit simpler to look after, but they couldn't go down to Bunnings and buy a mower and a whippersnipper. They actually had to go to England, get some greenkeepers, bring them over, and they did it all by hand. Every fancy palace needed a water feature or two, and the lay of the land was the key to their success. Because it's relatively hilly around here compared to the rest of the country. And to run fountains like this, you need water pressure. And without electricity, you've got to do it naturally. And this here was the King's water feature. And it goes 13 metres high, the biggest in the whole of Europe at its time. To his great frustration, King Louis over in France couldn't run all of his fountains at Versailles at the same time because he didn't have enough water pressure. In other words, they had bragging rights. On the east side of the palace is the Queen's Privy Garden with more beautiful parterres and some of Willem's favourite treasures of all.
This boy is really the oldest one in the garden. It's 310 years old.
Wow.
So it's from around 1700.
And just in case you're wondering, these oranges still make pretty good marmalade. But probably my favourite thing in the whole garden is this structure and this hedge. This is hornbeam. It's got a crinkle cut to it. It looks a bit like a chip and a serrated edge. And it takes 4 guys nearly a week to do the whole hedge. It's beautiful, isn't it? This was for the Queen and all the ladies in waiting. They didn't want to get sunburnt because they love their milky white skin. Don't think those ladies would do too good on our beaches in summer. Willem remembers planting this very arbour as a young nurseryman 32 years ago. Again, that must be one of those things that just makes you ridiculously proud.
Yeah, of course. You grow with the garden. It goes on for more than 300 years, this garden, and that's amazing.
And just when you think you've seen everything, you come outside the palace fences and there's another park, and you stumble across something like this. Straight out of the 15th century, it's called Hut Ouderloo, or the Old Woods Palace. You don't see that every day at home, do you? It's a medieval castle, and that was the first hunting lodge that they bought. They grew out of it, and they built the palace behind those fences. In the 1800s, when Napoleon's brother Louis became King of Holland, he filled in the moat because he was afraid of drowning. Luckily, a century later, it was redug and restored by the Dutch Queen, Wilhelmina. But still to this day, the royal family use this as their summer getaway. And looking at that with the drawbridge and the moat, you can understand why. It's beautiful. I think about the logistics part. They'd have to have a very good damp course. The old castle has its own stunning gardens. They're far less formal than the posh place next door. They're planted in a more rambling English landscape style. Reds, blues, purples, bright yellow. And in early summer, it's just chock-a-block full of amazing colour. Now, this park is only open for 2 months of the year when the rhododendrons are out. And as far as colours go, well, I reckon there's every colour of the rainbow plus a few to look at. Where can we grow these at home? In the cooler climates where you've got plenty of water and nice free-draining soil. Where could I put one at my place? Well, we've had a fantastic day at Hetlow Palace. It's truly inspirational to think what the landscapers and gardeners were doing hundreds of years ago. But it's even more inspirational to think what the Dutch landscapers and gardeners have done in the last couple of decades. The Hetlow Palace is remarkable, and the gardens that surround it are a must-see. Now, if you're looking at Hetlow and think it looks a lot like Versailles, well, gold star to you, because it's quite often referred to as the Versailles of Holland. The gardens follow the 17th century Baroque style established by André Lenotre, the famous French landscape architect who designed the gardens at Versailles. Now, his signature style was creating gardens with perfect symmetry, radiating gravel walks, parterres, fountains, basins and statues. So if you're a fan of formal gardens, after the break, you are going to love it, because I can show you how to bring a little bit of French grandeur into your garden. Maybe this garden is a little bit more French than I expected. A little earlier in the show, Graham showed you about the very posh gardens of the Palace of Versailles. Now, if you like that French formality, you're going to love this, because I'll show you how you can add the royal touch to your garden. Bonjour, monsieur, bonjour, madame, la Jason, la Pepe, la Pure, la Garden. OK, so I don't know that much about the French language, but I do know a little bit about their gardens, and what I'm looking at here doesn't scream France. Well, we're going to give it a new lease of life with some French influences. Now, the garden here isn't the same scale as Versailles, but I'm going to show you how we can use some of those elements and ideas as inspiration. So our plan here is to give this garden some uniformity, with hedges, a couple of feature trees on each side of the path, topiary and some annual flower colour. Look at this. Maybe this garden is a little bit more French than I expected. So symmetry is really important in a French garden, but ours is lopsided. So how do you pick the centre? Well, you do a drive-by. So I've done my drive-by, and what I've noticed is if I line it up with the front door, the windows are roughly equal distances apart there, and just forget about this fence. When you drive past, it makes sense. OK, now we've worked out our symmetry. I'm digging out the lawn for our 2 feature trees, and I'm using linkage to separate the lawn from the garden beds. You know that saying, less is more? Well, I'm going to apply it to these footings and the piers that come out of the stairs. I was scraping them back so that I could give an undercoat and then a paint. But when I've scraped it back, I've actually liked what I found. It's a bit of a story. It's a timeline of how old the house is, and it reminds me of old French quarters where the buildings are showing their age. So I'm not going to touch them. What I am going to paint are the little brick edges on the side of the path. This isn't rendering and it isn't bagging, it's just filling in the cracks and all the big divots, so when we paint it, it looks a lot more uniform. While I wait for that to dry, I'm going to move on to my next project. I'm going to put in a pergola. Now, rather than ordering all different types of timber and having to work on a design and measure it and use my brain, I bought a ready-made kit. You can pick up something similar at your local nursery or hardware store for under $100. Best thing about it, I reckon it's a great little weekend project, because between you and me, it's going to take about an hour. Don't tell your partner, and you can have the rest of the weekend off. Before I put it in place, I am going to give it a coat of paint. And then I'm going to fix it to the brickwork and it'll be nice and solid. Now that the cracks are full and dry, I'm going to paint these edges. The thing about a French garden is it looks really precise. But because you're only using a few select plants, they're actually quite easy to set up and plant out. Across this garden bed, both sides of the stairs, I've got gardenias and lavender in front. Now, if they're clipped and hedged up, you might get a few less flowers, but they'll look very formal. Across the fence, and to divide the neighbours, I'm going with Viburnum odotisserum. Either side of the trellis, I've got some star jasmine that can climb over and in time will hide this. When you're buying plants from a quality nursery, there's a very good chance you'll have slow-release fertiliser sitting on top of your pot. Rather than tipping it over and spilling it anywhere on the lawn or on a hard surface, tip it over above your hole. Look at all that fertiliser that's now in the bottom of the hole that this plant can draw up and keep growing. It's like a free feed. In other words, going to your parents' house. Now, my piece de resistance, the feature of this garden, are these junipers. They're called Spartans. Now, they'll get to 3 metres in 10 years if you don't clip them, but we've bought them done in these 3 beautiful balls. Now, you might think they're hard to maintain, but if you just give them a haircut, keep your eye on them, they're relatively easy. And the thing about the Spartans that's good is they stay green all the way inside. They don't brown off like other junipers and conifers, so they look always fresh and green. Just finishing off the icing on the cake, the last little flower to go into the garden. Now, with the viburnum, I've planted Snowtopia, and they pretty much flower all year round, so they'll complement each other and be nice and calm. Across the back, I've got New Guinea Impatiens. Now, I like them because on a hot day, they go like this. Best thing about them, give them a water and they stand straight back up and they're as happy as Larry, no side effects. So I use them kind of like an alarm clock to say that the garden needs a drink. Across the front, we've got Snapdragons, a classic little annual, and we've got Cineraria around our feature plantings in the front of the lawn. Well, this little La Jardin garden is beautiful now. You've got that touch of France. Same on both sides. I love the punch of colour and these plants that are really going to be a draw card and a talking point. So this is what something in France looks like. But what do things in France taste like? Well, you can't go past the croissant. I like mine with Vegemite part. Good girl, Dan. So there you have it, a garden fit for the finest royal right here in an Aussie suburb. Now here's your royal orders. Don't go anywhere, because after the break, we're heading straight back to Europe for more big, beautiful royal gardens.
Next, we discover a fairy tale-like garden hidden in the grounds of Windsor Castle. It's considered by many to be Britain's most beautiful ornamental garden. Welcome back to Secrets of Beautiful Gardens. Now, the next stop on our royal tour is the very regal holiday home of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. Now, when most people think of Windsor Castle, the first thing that comes to mind is the iconic Long Walk. But the Long Walk is only a small section of 5,000 acres of Windsor Great Park. There's another section that I just love, and I know you will too. It's a beautiful woodland called Savill Gardens. Pretty impressive, eh? Windsor Castle is one of the largest and longest inhabited castles in the world. In fact, it is still the Queen's favourite weekender. The world-famous Savill Garden, set on 35 acres, is considered by many to be Britain's most beautiful ornamental garden. This botanic wonderland was created in the 1930s by the Kings Park Ranger, Sir Eric Savill. Today, Mark Flanagan carries on the legacy, caring for a vast collection of rare and exotic plant species. It's just like you're up in the Himalayas.
Well, you've got it exactly right, Graham, because that's what we're trying to recreate here. Just pluck this one at random, Graham. Look at that. This is one called Rosebud, and I think you'll agree it's well named.
It's a glorious thing.
Very full, isn't it?
It is.
The Savill Garden is known for developing the woodland garden. And Eric Savill really push this idea, you know, with herbaceous plants at ground level, through the rhododendrons and camellias to the magnolias and then to the big oak trees which form the protective canopy. So that idea of a tiered effect is at the heart of the design here.
These beautiful canopy trees, how old would they be?
And most of these date from the oaks at least about 250 years, but everything else that you see planted in the 1940s and 50s.
Right, so these go back 200 years?
Yeah, they were already here.
It's terribly important to look after our old trees, isn't it?
I think so, because without them, you know, this whole woodland would be too hot and sunny.
Yeah. Quite a large area is actually left as wild woodland, just underplanted with these beautiful meadow flowers. The red campion, the silene, there's some buttercups, and of course a beautiful planting of bluebells at the back here. Now, while most of these won't do that well in Australia, you could have some alternatives like some Australian native wildflowers, some straw flowers and everlastings. Mix the seed up and scatter them through. But to guarantee the colour, put in some bulbs. You can mix and match the exotics and the natives, quite okay. But don't forget to plant the trees. Then, of course, you can retire the lawnmower. Away from the spring wood, there is a gorgeous rockery that has a very special meaning. Its walls were built using the bricks of bombed-out houses destroyed during World War II. So these are quite special.
The exquisite rockery is a little micro-garden of the most delicate flowers and succulents.
Yeah, very different, obviously, Graham. It's more an alpine kind of feel here. I mean, with careful plant selection, we've give that Rocky Mountain top kind of feel.
Rockeries were really big in the 60s. Then they fell out of favour, but you know, this is a great idea here. These are raised garden beds using the rocks. And look at the plants. This is Armeria or Thrift. Beautiful flower and a really dark burgundy green leaf. Fabulous little plant, but there are lots of them here, like the Aquiledias. Mass planting of alpine phlox. Even the succulents, sempervivium, called the house leeks. Don't forget, many of the succulents, the cacti and things, actually have fantastic flowers as well. On the west coast of Australia, of course, we've got great limestone. On the east coast, sandstone, and then the heavier stones in Victoria. They'd all make great rockeries, but plant selection is what it's all about.
In this garden, it's not just about flowers, but incredible foliage plants as well, where flowers are the bonus. But the soil must be just right.
The whole area used to be known as the Bog Garden, but today it's one of the hidden treasures of Savill Gardens. And the reason the soils are so moist, just behind these trees and shrubs, is the watercourse. And that water feeds back in the soil, making this very peaty, sandy soil permanently moist. So if you've got shade and moist conditions, what sort of plants could you grow? Now, if you want something really dramatic, you'd have to go for the dinosaur rhubarb at the back there. That's Grandeur. It'll actually grow in water as well. Spectacular plant. And then, of course, there's Ligularia. I've got this at home and it really grows well and flowers beautifully. Now, if you're in a cooler area, maybe you'd go for the hostas, and there's lots of different colours, from steel greys to lush greens and variegated forms as well. But if you want flowers, then maybe you need to go for some of the perennial primulas, long, tall candelabra flowers. Or, of course, there's Polygonum. Wow, aren't they spectacular? These huge heads of pink drumstick flowers. A fabulous plant. A little bit hard to buy, but once you've got them, they'll spread and divide themselves through the garden. I hope you took a note of those couple of plants, because if you've got shade and damp soils, they'll help you. Every garden really needs a water feature, even a little courtyard, but here they've got a magnificent pond that goes for miles in either direction, creating really beautiful vistas. It also gives you the opportunity to grow some great water-loving plants. These ferns that just pop up all the way around the edge of the pond. And of course, the fabulous flowering Japanese iris. I just love them. They always sort of pop into colour at this time of the year. If you're ever in London, you've got to put Savill Garden on your visit list. The horticulture is great, the atmosphere is just beautiful, and the plants are a real joy. I guarantee you'll enjoy it. You know, Windsor Great Park originally started out in the 13th century as the private hunting grounds of King Henry III, who planted large trees to encourage deer more than 800 years ago.
Mature trees now protect the garden and have ultimately created the environment for the gardens that exist today. So if you've got established trees at your place, see what microclimate they've already created so that you can add an extra dimension in your garden. Up next,
The Würzburg Palace. Money was no object to these guys. They were seriously minted. And so you can see why they demanded that the garden match the palace. Welcome back to the show. Now you're in for a royal treat because I'm about to take you to a masterpiece of Baroque styling in Germany's Rhine Valley. Würzburg's Palace and Gardens is a step back in time to a very decadent period. And the result, well, it's one of the most over-the-top palaces in Europe. High up on the hill, that's where the powerful prince bishops lived. Now, they were the rulers of the land. They were the leaders of the church. And as big and as impressive as that was, it wasn't good enough. They got the building bug. They wanted something bigger and grander. And this is what they built. The Würzburg Palace. Money was no object to these guys. They were seriously minted. And so you can see why they demanded that the garden match the palace. Showing us around is palace expert Susanna. Were they keen gardeners or they just wanted to show off?
It was a show-off, and of course every prince bishop, every ruler wanted to show what he could afford, what kind of plants he had, what kind of fruits he could grow.
Laid out in 1720, it took some 60 years for most of the courtyard to be completed. When I think of a palace, I usually think of big, long views in the garden. The shape of your garden is very irregular.
It is.
Why is that?
The walls you see here is part of the old city walls, of the old fortification of the city. They were forced to put the garden around the palace, and this is why it has that special shape.
Built into these walls was to be a magnificent water feature, a cascade. Well, that was the plan anyway.
But it's never finished, you know, it was never finished, so...
I'm happy to quote on it if you want someone to finish it for you.
Yeah.
I'll come over in my Christmas holidays and finish it.
Great.
As grand as everything is, you can still see how it's inspired gardeners in Australia. The standard roses are stunning. You could replace them at home with white icebergs. And then the ground cover is just some shrub roses where you're going to get a heap of flowers that you can put inside in your vases. Bordered with a bit of lawn and some buxus, if this path was crushed granite, it'd just be like the grandest version of my parents' house. In the 18th century, they were also very fond of green arbours, and the more, the better. These immaculate giant corridors of cornelian cherry dogwood add drama and form to the garden. The thing that probably takes my breath away the most is how much patience they had when they were building things. Yes, I'll commission a builder and I'll have a house in 30 years' time. Or yes, I'll build a pergola, but then they've got to plant the hedge. Take a generation for that to fill out so it looks right from the front. But if you've got the time and patience, it definitely pays off. How good does this arbour of mulberry look? It's just trained over some steel bar. We'd probably use Rio these days. It'd get pruned back every year to keep the shape, so they'd leave the old trunks and take off all the new growth. And then along here, buxus, one of my favourites. They obviously don't have the blight here. They've got curves and rectangles and these beautiful cones. It's quite simple, it's parterre, and it's very formal. At Würzburg Palace, even the wrought iron garden gates are a work of art. As a tradesman, everywhere I look, I think, how did they do that? They didn't have the tools that I've got. They don't have power for starters. They can't pick up an angle grinder and just buff something off. I'm glad it was them and not me. And now we're in the South Garden, and there's two main features of this water basin and its yew trees. Now, sort of confuses me a little bit. Everything's so formal. They've spent months and years shaping gates and sculptures, and then they plonk this rock in here. But it's meant to represent nature, and it's meant to look more natural than the rest of the garden. And then these yew trees. Now, 100 years ago, could you imagine trying to shape that? It'd take you a week just to set up the scaffold, even before you got the clippers out. Now it'd be quite easy. You'd get a little machine in and lift you up there and you'd do it electrically. And they're sort of like umbrellas for a sculpture that's dotted around each of the 8. And every path and everywhere you look is bordered with boxes and planted out with colourful annuals. Well, for an everyday landscaper like me, I am just blown away. A stunning palace garden that rivals some of the best in Europe. Those Prince Bishops must have been a knockabout bunch with sticky fingers, because I don't think the collection plate ever fed the poor. Everything about the place was over the top, and everything screamed money. Back in the day, Würzburg Palace cost 1.5 million florins to build. Now, at the same time, the average labourer was earning 1 florin a week. Now, my maths ain't that good, but year 8 was the best 3 years of my life, but I think I've worked it out. In today's money, that'd cost about $2 billion. Fair chunk of change for some bricks.
Coming up next, we've kept the best till last. We're about to show you a hidden royal treasure. It's the Queen's Garden. Welcome back. Buckingham Palace, the official home of Queen Elizabeth, is one of the most famous royal residences in the world. Now, whilst the palace's balcony and the forecourt are instantly recognisable, the 39 acres of gardens behind remain pretty much a mystery. Well, the last stop in our royal tour today, I'm taking you behind the palace walls to the Queen's Garden, the largest private garden in all of London. Taxi! Buckingham Palace, thanks, driver. Well, I have to say, I'm pretty excited. Because I'm in London and I'm off to the palace. She's the world's most well-known, most loved monarch. This is where she lives, and the flag's up, looks like she's home. We're incredibly honoured and excited to get an invitation to, yes, Buckingham Palace. Because we're about to show you a hidden royal treasure. It's the Queen's Garden. We catch glimpses of it when Her Majesty holds one of her famous garden parties. But what many of you may not know is that away from the tea tents and deep in the grounds are 39 acres of the most beautiful gardens. If you think the rhododendrons are spectacular, wait till you see the Mollis azaleas. A garden of contrasts. There's something to discover around every corner. The famous palace herbaceous borders. And already some early spring colour is popping up, including some gorgeous fragrant lilacs. You can just imagine the Queen enjoying the grounds she knows so well. Young Princess Elizabeth was 11 when she moved into Buckingham Palace, a few months before her father, George VI, was crowned king on May the 12th, 1937. She and her younger sister Margaret were to spend much of their childhood in the palace's treasured garden. What's it like to work in this magnificent garden?
Oh, it's a privilege, it really is. It's such.
Nowadays, Claire Midgley-Adam is the Queen's Deputy Gardens Manager.
The garden itself has got so many different characters within it, and then you get the special times like today, a garden party day.
Yeah, exactly. We're in the rose gardens, which are very well known because of the quality and the selection of the varieties. I noticed you've got some of the royal family roses as we came along there. The Queen has a bit of an organic pest control sort of regime that she likes.
Well, we take on board as much as we can organic regimes, so we will use garlic and soapy water, but the main key for healthy plants and pest and disease to use organically is to keep them healthy.
Yeah.
So a good fertilising regime and keeping them their own self-defence systems up. Any big projects, we'll consult with Her Majesty straight away.
I guess, you know, having been a childhood garden, she understands it really well.
Yes, yeah.
And all the places to hide, no doubt.
Probably.
Yeah, sure she does. And the wonderful thing is, if you're in London from late July to the end of September, you too can book a guided tour of the Queen's Garden and see it for yourself. Like, how about this? The famous Waterloo vase, 20 tons of marble booty from the Napoleonic Wars. You can't help but be amazed on the sheer scale of the garden. And taking centre stage is a very beautiful 3-acre ornamental lake. Completed in 1828, today this urban oasis is home to some 30 species of birdlife. It's one of the most tranquil parts of the garden, with the waterfall, the lake, the trees, the ducks. In this secluded woodland spot, many varieties of bog plants thrive, including the lovely yellow Japanese iris, which loves the moist conditions. Hard to believe that just over the fence on the corner there is Hyde Park Corner. So much diversity. You'll even see some Aussies happily growing here, like this eucalypt. And in another corner, a special prehistoric treasure.
So this is the Wollimy pine.
Ah, looking very happy.
Yeah, in the middle of a shrubbery.
Yes, looking great. Certainly a couple of new plant species around since my own great-uncle, Thomas Hay, was head of London's Royal Parks back in the early 1900s. It's 100 years since my uncle walked through these grounds with the King. How much would it have changed in that time, do you think?
It has changed. I mean, the structure is probably the same. The tree canopies obviously changed, the elm to the London plane.
They've gone and rebuilt.
And there's a lot more shrubberies and planting areas now. You are aware of the heritage of it, and you do your best to do right by current methods, creating the interest for everybody who visits.
Well, it's been a real thrill to show you around this historic garden.
Mate, you must have felt a bit of connection to that garden with your Uncle Tom. What was it like to visit it?
Jason, it was really strange. I had a strong sense of déjà vu, which was a bit weird because it was my first visit to Buckingham Palace. But everywhere I went, I felt like I was catching up with a long-lost member of the family. I was 21 when my grandmother told me about Uncle Tom, and I'm still blown away by how unknowingly I followed in his footsteps.
Mate, you even look like him. You should get one of those moustaches. You could be his twin. But the reality is, a generation ago, our parents or our grandparents would never get access to the palaces and castles that we did. And I love how the modern royals have opened them up to the public so that everyone can go and visit.
Absolutely. And if you've been inspired by what you've just seen, put it on your bucket list. Well, that brings today's royal tour to an end. We hope you've enjoyed discovering the secrets of the spectacular gardens featured throughout this series, both here in Australia and around the world, and that they've inspired you to create your very own beautiful garden.
And then one day, you'll be talking about the gardens that me and Graham have shown you today.
But for now, it's goodbye from us.